Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. We welcome back Michael Tsarion to the channel. Michael, can you talk to us about the phenomenology of belief and faith?
Yes, yes, that's a good place to go because we did the psychology and the philosophy. Now, the phenomenology is a very ugly word. It just means the study of a phenomena, whatever that phenomena may be. This will be, the phenomenology of the phenomena of faith and belief. But phenomenology came about as a reaction to both philosophy and psychology. Okay, thinkers. It started with this new way, like a third way that was needed to encounter reality, bearing in mind the whole thing of Immanuel Kant, that whatever we recognize as reality is dependent on the makeup of our own minds. If our minds, like say, you imagine an alien who had a different kind of mind, they'd experience a different reality. Our senses, our minds, our attitudes actually shape the world we know. So there was this problem, right? But phenomenology wanted to address this, but it said that, look, philosophy is very abstract and sometimes very heady. So that's not anything, it's not practical enough. So we'll create something that, brings things much more down to earth, because phenomenology was entirely based on the reality that you're experiencing right here and now, and mostly descriptions of it. Trying to describe what you're doing, and you find that very, very hard to do. And when you succeed in doing it, real meaning jumps off the page. So think of the phenomenologist as the clipboard wielding philosopher who doesn't philosophize. He asks people what they're doing. A criminal will be asked, so why do you commit crimes? And let's see the kinds of crimes that you committed. Walk us through your thoughts. Walk us through, okay, Jeffrey Dahmer, you like to eat people, okay, how did that start? By plucking leaves off trees, and then you went on to kill animals, and you liked that because it gave you a feeling of power. Is that because you were feeling disempowered up until that point? Yes, it is. And did you keep all those trophies because you actually have a bond with the thing that you killed because you owe it a debt of showing you the power that you had? Yeah, that's about it, yeah. And then you walk the person through their story. The other thing that they didn't like was psychology. They were involved with psychology, but the flaw in psychology was psychologization. What an ugly word. Psychologization, psychologizing everything. So they said that you find out that these people are into psychology, then everything is brought under the rubric of psychological analysis or interpretation. And they thought that that was not good either, because it changed life for the worst. Like Freud said, a cigar is sometimes just a cigar. A pipe is just a pipe. But psychologists can forget this. And then every single thing that we do, everything an ant is doing in the anthill or a termite, suddenly gets, it can only be explaining it through psychology. And although that is true up to a certain point, you can go too far with it. So phenomenology had that problem. They thought that this had happened. So again, phenomenology comes out, let's study a thing in a slightly different way. Let's sidelight it. Let it speak. The best thing about phenomenology is, instead of interpreting and putting meanings on life and on things, let the thing speak for itself. Give it a lot of room. So it's actually quite an interesting study, but it pertains to religion in the most peculiar way. And we'll just do a little 101 sketch here of phenomenology, because for the phenomenologist, the first thing that they're going to notice is the presence of this big thing called a book. It's called the book. But you find it in the Quran, in Islam, you find it in Taoism, the Tao Te Ching is a book. You will find it in the Hindus with the Vedas, Upanishads, and Puranas. And pretty much every major religion has this big, thick thing called the book. So if they were, think of them coming in with blank slates, and they go, we want to understand what you are as Christians. You go, this mate, this here is what it's about. My belief in this, it's all in here, it contains it. You go, what do you mean contains it? Can I hear the voice of God in it? No, I can't hear anything. No, it contains it right here in the written word of God. So this is the phenomenologist goes, oh, okay, we've seen this pattern before. And then you look at the book. Now think about the medieval days. The book was a fairly illustrated thing. Even in the Celtic days, you can go back to the Celtic monks, the illustrations are phenomenal. And then this translucent paper, and these extraordinary words on it, and some of them are very big words, but just the look of the tome is what they'd be looking at as a phenomenologist. And then later they'd maybe move to, other things like you're going to church and before they get into your beliefs, they just look at what it is of a day to be a Christian. But see, we won't go any further here than this idea of the book, because you do get it in Islam, in Taoism, in the Vedas, and even the Apocrypha. Think of the Book of Mormon or the Jehovah's Witnesses. So the fascinating thing to see here is this tome, this book that everything else revolves around. That leads you to the next step, to realize that long before any of the religions we've just mentioned existed, words were themselves sacred. That's where this leads. So like I said, stuff jumps off the page you would never see as a Christian. You'd never see once you're in it. You see, this is the point. So phenomenology steps back and says, well, as a matter of fact, when it comes to holy books and beautifully illustrated, and translucent paper and the aura that it has, look, that is thousands. You've got to go back to Babylon. One of your guests, could have done a whole work on this. Professor he had on talking about the Semitic languages and the Sumerian languages. Well, what about hieroglyphics? What about those Chinese characters? The Ogam, the runes. So texts, letters, think about it. They were there in the world thousands of years before the official religions, and they were sacred. And the oral tradition of Ireland is what I'm thinking of, the Druids. One could talk endlessly about, in fact, even the word, the leaves of a book, pages of a book are called leaves. That's a direct reference to the Druids who wrote on leaves. So phenomenologically, it's still around. Bucca comes from a plant. That's the papyrus. Byblos was the Sumerian city in which the papyrus plants were processed for writing. What? Just like testament comes from the Jewish ritual of grabbing the testicles. It's actually in the Bible. Noah does it. Elijah does it, and that's it. By by my right hand, by the truth of my right hand, or whatever you get. And that is to grip the phallus, grip the testicles, and say, "This is my law and testament." Today, we just put the hand on the Bible. Probably a better thing to do, right? When you're swearing an oath. So this is incredible how this all goes back. So what we've done, phenomenologists would say, all you've done is take the sacredness of the word and repackaged it. But if I take off the Catholic and Protestantism and Judaism, I'm left with the sacredness of the actual word. Well, an unbiased Christian will say, yeah, and in the Bible, the word is God. What? Well, yeah, we always, my holy word, Jesus' holy word. The word is actually part of the actual text itself, the sacredness of it. They go, oh, well, that's right. Okay, we're finding out something here. But what I'm trying to make clear here is that the word is sacred. There's been some weird ricocheting and deflection for Christians. The word that you're reading and the Bible is filled of are the sacred words, not as you think they are, by what they mean. It doesn't matter what they mean. Say, think of a hieroglyph to make it, you have to distance yourself. Think of a Chinese, ancient Chinese hierogram. Those are sacred in themselves, is what I mean. The Chinese characters. And that's why they make a big deal about the calligraphy by which you paint or draw that. Think of the Quran. Look at those flame-like letters. That's a relic of what I'm talking about. Look at the beauty of, say, Hindi or Urdu. Again, flame-like, written from left to right, whatever. Hebrew is the same. They don't just go A, B, C, D, E. No, they've got Aleph, Gimel, Beth, Hey, Val, right? There's a longer pronunciation of those words. And those go back to primal sounds, the history of which is absolutely extraordinary, right? The primal sounds underneath it. We would call it sort of like vowel sounds. So when you look at all of that, those were actually sacred. And so when a later group comes along and without knowing what they're doing, they abstract the holiness of words and language and put it into another form and forget about it. And the form becomes, the capsule is now sacred. The scribe knows different. The mythmonger kind of knows different, but by the time it's repackaged in this or that form, it takes on another substance. And we forget that the actual words themselves. So in this way, don't you see, a dictionary is the most holiest book that exists. You could have Webster's etymological complete dictionary, the Bible, and the telephone book on the same altar, because what I'm trying to say is that, and from a phenomenological point of view, the very word and the very word you speak and write down was itself sacred. Now, for many reasons we can't get into, definitely admit we're not going to get into all of that because it would just go on for hours as to why that is. So think of the aesthetics. Bibles are collector's items now. So that's what we were kind of talking about. The simple look of a Bible, the fact that it is full of these words, which were, back here, words are already sacred. Jesus, in the 19th century, if you gave a book to somebody, it was like treasured, you know, it had this beautiful calligraphy inside it, and it was considered an heirloom. Look at where we are today. In the 19th century, one of the most precious things that existed was a book, which is why there's, you know, some of them are very highly illustrated and extraordinary in terms of design. You know, think of, so now you see the cognitive dissonance. Everything I've just said, not one in a million Christians are aware of. They read the words and they try to abstract a meaning from it. And that's what the mythmongers want. They've been manipulating that for years, even in ancient India, you know, with the Puranas and all of that. And we're actually glossing over that which is the most sacred, the reading of the words. These Sikhs they have the Adi Granth. It's like 5 volumes or something like that, you know. So in every religion, and you get this, and you get the same faux pas, you get the same oversight. So we've cannibalized all religion from a phenomenological point of view is a cannibalization of that which is sacred, but has been desacralized. And those are words. Then you say, we worship the word of God. We worship that. No, you don't. No, you don't. You've repackaged it. So if you went then to some shaman who really knows all of this, they'd say, well, the language that you're speaking right now when you're talking to me is what is sacred. What do you do with that? You know, I came here with I got questions. I came here with all these complaints that I've got. I've written them all down. And I want you, Mr. Priest or whatever, I want to talk to you about my problem, my religious, spiritual problems. I've got a spiritual crisis going on here. Right? The greatest teacher will say, keep talking. Because we're going to really address something extraordinary. You have a spiritual crisis because you have abstracted the so-called meaning of what you've been reading. That's right. I read the Bible from, day and night. But Blake said, yeah, but where you read black, I read white. And it's similar in this. The words themselves is the investiture of the sacred. Graffiti is actually sacred to the buggers who deface our cities putting it up. But in their world, that's a form of expression. It's not so much about what does it mean? Can't read that writing. You don't need to. There's something about the sacredness of those shapes. They have multiple levels of meaning, destructive and dark as well as positive, you see, like this. So to boil it all down, the phenomenologist soon realizes it's a great deal to do with diction. It's a great deal to do with expression. It's a great deal to do with the manipulation of words. And of course, metaphor. What the hell is a metaphor anyway? If I say, oh, sure, fella, you've got a hard heart, you're hard-hearted. Does that mean that his heart is actually hard? Made out of leather or marble? No, and the man hearing it knows exactly what I'm saying, as everybody else would. They go, oh, you're a hard-hearted fella, you're hard-hearted. It's a metaphor for a person's stiff, rigid personality. Well, then why don't we just say that? Hey, mate, you've got a very rigid and tough personality, you do. Why do we say, oh, you have a hard heart? So that's a sharp tongue you've got. Just start examining how many metaphors. That guy's got a face like a hatchet. Why do we have these metaphors? And then now that we do have them, right, because they're very colorful and everything, why is our language filled with them? You get questions out of this. And so once you go down that line, you see that the Bible is filled with these metaphors. God is in his heavens, all right with the world. Well, obviously everything is not right with the world, right? You see, so you start breaking it down, and you start breaking it down on a very big level. Take the mythologies of Samson and Delilah. There's messages within there. There's metaphors within there. We don't like authority. There's no authority over me but God. The hell with the Pharaoh, and the hell with the potentate and the patriarch. And watch out for the wiles of women. You've got to watch that silken trap. All of these different metaphors. So once you understand that the word is God in this particular way, in other words, we all accept, as the Bible does, that light is sacred. Because if you didn't have light, you couldn't see. And if you couldn't see, then we don't get out of the caves. We don't even get to the caves, let alone to higher forms of understanding and awareness and literacy, you see? So light is important. And often in Hebrew, the writing was from left to right, because that's the way the sun moved in the southern hemisphere. And of course, since I cannot write without the light, in my writing, I show the light, meaning I write across the page as the light moves across the sky, so that I'm ever present with what is happening. And by the way, this even impacts what we were saying about the Greeks. Scholars like Owen Barfield, Julian Jaynes, they noticed that there's very few nouns in ancient Greek. Their language is mostly verbs, which is action. So if I was to say to you, oh, that man has a beard, you go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, he's grown a beard. But the Greeks would say, just to give an example, he is bearding. That man is bearding. See, it sounds very, very strange to our ears, incongruent. But to them, it would have been, oh, is that right? Because just like flowering, that tree is flowering, that plant is flowering. And it brings everything to the present tense. See, we're not even in the real. In the modern world, we've got cognitive dissonance like up the gazoo. We're very far from the thinking of our ancestors. And nobody even wants to address this. They're saying about this, somebody would say, one anecdote, Homer died. He is dead. The Greeks would say, he passed out of this life. Homer walked out of life. We don't even really conceive the difference in those two. Oh, he's dead. No, he walked from this life. There's a very, very big difference linguistically and, imaginatively and cognitively in those stages. So again, we are miles away from where it used to be. And certain documents have helped in that process. So the real misuse is with our words, because it's through our words, the bridge of words, that we understand who we are and through what the world is. Right. So the word psyche becomes very important, doesn't it? If you take if phenomenologically you discover this, then the fact that self. I was just thinking to myself there. What is self? It's a word. Psyche, male, female. Conscious, unconscious. Right? We're not living in what they point to. The words themselves are the thing. Now, we don't want to explore this any further than that, but the idea is that there's a great deal of power and meaning in the very words, and our world is made up of words, which are signs, right, which go back to the semiotic, the roots of them do anyway, and then they become symbolic as we cross into explaining the world. So we say, oh, words are just there to explain the world. No, they are the world. So does this undermine religion? Yes, to a degree it does, because it's trying to go beneath belief and faith to something more concrete. And it was in the idea that you find yourself in a world, and that world needs to be explained. And so we develop language. Then we not just the sounds of language, but suddenly they're transformed to the page. And they obviously are phenomenologically sacred. There's no need for belief or faith, and there's no supernaturalism involved. Sounds that I make in order to explain the world and to have a sense of meanness finally turned into the Cadmean letters, these Aryan languages. And then they became sacred as they are in themselves, because they are the vehicles by which you understand. So letter A was connected to an ox, to a plow, to a mountain, and on it goes, right? They conjure images that then create other images in our mind, and we're still working out life through the mechanism, the tool, but it's a phenomenological one. It's right here in front of us. And therefore the tool that opens my eyes, right, that allows me access to world, and actually even then does give me a super, if we have to talk about supernaturalism and super sensual existence, it's still language that gives rise to that. But first it gave rise because we heard the animals crying, we heard the birds singing, and we developed these means of communication. And the means of communication, what was sacred? Much more than when you adapt it and readapt it and adapt it again and tell all sorts of stories. Don't put the sacred in the story. The sacredness is in the vehicle that you've used, which are the words you write. Think of a poet. Think of the songs that you love the best, lyric writing, script writing, the great literature, the great stories. But the greater writer, the one who is really on it, the true poet, when the capitalized P, is the one who understands what is really sacred, is literally the words he's writing. And this then accounts for the extraordinary calligraphy, that many cultures in the world had, because they wanted the writing itself to look aesthetically beautiful, because to remind everyone when they're writing, this is what is sacred. So extra time, the extent to which some of these ancient Chinese went, it's incredible. And the Taoists were the same, right? The beautiful paintings, and only very few men had the skill to really do it correctly, with the brushes and all of this. So we've lost that. It's just all digital, it's just all typed letters and ones and zeros, and that that again shows a fall. Actually, that shows a fall off of the sacredness of language itself. And there's a whole school, partly phenomenological, partly romantic. There's great scholars, like some of the people I've mentioned, who have gone deeply into this. J.R.R. Tolkien was one of them, and there were others. Julian James was one of them. To try and tease out, and I'll be doing a lot more work on this in the future, to try and really emboss for our modern world just how it comes about that words and language, you see, is sacred, and how you can make whole philosophies out of that just make religion null and void. It's a very, very important step on the ladder, actually.
Michael Tsarion, thank you.